welcome to the 22nd annual Chemers Gallery event. This year we're very pleased that part of the proceeds go to Chapman University, where I'm a professor, and to our Muth Reading Center, where we tutor children and where our own students who are studying to become teachers work with students. So part of the proceeds from the book sale today and the art sales will go to the College of Educational Studies, and specifically our Reading Center and our tutoring program. So welcome. This is the 22nd year. It's really quite amazing what the Chemers Gallery does. And I'm going to be introducing each of the artists, and usually at the beginning I give us a little something to kind of think about regarding children's illustrations, art, and children's books. So today what I picked for a topic was the relationship between art and text, between the visual image and between the words or the text. So I thought I'd start back with history and ask you which you think actually came first, the visual depiction of story and the image, or the words as text? Any ideas? Okay, the visual image probably was first, and can you think in what form that might be? Where, historically? Etchings, and I'm thinking of cave paintings, and yes, I'm way back to say that in history we probably started with the image for telling stories, and in addition to the image, then we began, when we developed language, to storytell orally and pass it, stories down through generations orally. And so writing down text really is a later discovery for language and storytelling. And at first, even writing down the language was done individually by hand and really was an art form of its own. If you look back at medieval manuscripts, for example, they're absolutely exquisitely hand-written and hand-painted. Does anybody know the invention of something that changed books and the possibilities for books forever? The printing press, okay. In the 1400s, 1452, I think it was, Gutenberg and the invention of the printing press. And what did that enable us to do? Then we could mass produce. And so then we started having books and started thinking about reading. And at first, reading was something that adults did and children listened to. And it was an even later movement to start reading with children, with young children, and with children's books. The 20th century is an explosion for children's books, and especially after, we call it the Renaissance, after World War II. So whose books can you think of that were very popular children's books now, where there were simple illustrations and simple text, rhyming sound, that were really some of the first? Dr. Seuss, okay, who lived in San Diego for much of his adult life. So New York and then San Diego. And since then we've had an explosion. Now we have another change in the 21st century, and we have another way to access storytelling and children's books. So what is the latest? Technology. And we're living in an era now, almost going back, if you will, full cycle to the cave pictures, where the image is becoming much more important. So we're accessing a lot of information through the visual image again. So that gives us kind of a quick and dirty history. I'd like to give you 7 different relationships between text and pictures to think about, and I have some of my favorite books that I'll pass around to share with you that illustrate some of those. And the first one is symmetrical. So if the words and the images are symmetrical, what do you think that might mean? In some children's books, they are symmetric.
They complement each other?
Okay, they are the same. The second one I'm going to go to is complementary, and that would be where they complement each other. The first is symmetry. So you have the words and the picture, the image, exactly describes the text. So it's an exact reflection of the text. The second one is complementary, so very good. And if they're complementary, then the text, what would you say for complementary? What would you give as a... Yes, it augments the text. It complements it. It might give you a zoom in. It might give you more detail, but in some way it complements the text or the words. The third one is contradictory, and this is a little harder. If the relationship between the text and the image is contradictory, and I want you to look for that as people present today, that's a hard one. Anybody would think what that might be?
It's where the text is telling one story, but the pictures are telling a completely different story.
Exactly, and I don't have the book with me, but there's a little book called Rosie's Walk that is exact like that. The text or the words are telling you one story, but you get the humor and the irony because the picture's telling you something completely different.
How about opposites of Chloe and Gloria? Because he's saying one thing and the dog behind him is playing and acting out.
Exactly.
The officer is telling the children safety tips and the dog behind him is doing something else.
So it's a little more sophisticated, isn't it? And it's amazing that children do get that. They get the humor and they get the juxtaposition or the contradiction, that the text or the words are telling you one thing, but the picture's giving you something else. Okay, good. The next one is metacognitive, and this is a fairly new one. Metacognition just means you are aware of your own process. So if the words and the pictures are metacognitive, do you have any idea what that might mean?
Just to try to make you think of this thought. It isn't directly referring to it, but it's bringing it out of your mind.
It's where the characters in the story are aware that they are in a book. So this is a fairly new relationship between text and image, where you have the characters are actually aware that they're in a storybook. I think of the Stinky Cheese book is an example of that. And there's a book where the chicken is a character and gets squashed between the table of contents and the dedication page. So you've got the visual image or the illustration, and the illustration is aware that it is in a storybook, and sometimes aware that that you are the reader, that you are out there. It's a different relationship.
For David Weissman, he has a book, The Three Little Pigs.
Yes.
Would you consider that, even though they're not, I don't know if they're aware if they're in the story.
I'd have to go back and see, but the criteria is, are they aware that they're characters in a storybook? And this is playing with image and words and developing story in a new way. So this is a metacognition. That's a pretty new one. Interpretive is the next one. This is a different, yet again, a different relationship between the words and the text. I'll show you the example that I have. This is, believe it or not, an illustrated version of Moby Dick. And we know the text. Basically what the artist or illustrator did here was take something from each page of Moby Dick and out of his own imagination create a piece of art. So there's something on each page in Moby Dick, but not an exact representation that sparked a creative idea.
But if you read it all the way through...
And if you read it all the way through, it's fascinating to read the page and then to look and see if you can find what the artist took. And it's strictly non-representational, and it's their interpretation of what is in the text. And I'll leave this here so you can take a look at it. I think it's absolutely amazing to take a classic like Moby Dick. I think it took the artist about 2 years to do all of the illustrations, to do all of the artwork that goes with the book. And it's really an art piece of its own. And probably one of the newer ones is graphic. Now, what is the graphic relationship? We're moving now where the image is becoming more primary. What can you say about a graphic the relationship in a graphic test.
Like cartoons.
Okay, cartoons would be one. What else? Okay, in upscale comics, we're now using comics as a form, and I think if you look in at some of the artwork today even, you'll see some that are kind of cartoonish. We have mostly, anybody read The Invention of Hugo Cabret or see the movie? Okay, that's a graphic novel where there are extremely detailed pictures, and the pictures actually move the story along. You would not get the story without the detailed pictures. And that's Bryan Selznick. He went on from The Invention of Hugo Cabret, and this is really one of my favorites, Wonderstruck. This is really two stories in one. There are two characters. One story is told only in pictures. It's graphite. It's black and white. The other story is told only, you can see the detail here. When I get to the text. The other person's story is told only in words. So you are literally following stories of two people 50 years apart, and at the end of the book, the two stories come together. The two people, it is just a magnificent, extremely imaginative book. So I highly recommend this one if you enjoyed The Invention of Hugo Cabret. We also have books to complete it that have no text, where we move only with the image, and that comes to David Wiesner. And I don't know if you know, Tuesday is one of his books. This is Flotsam, and if I just turn to some of the pages, you can see it's done in watercolor, and there is no text. The entire story is moved along only through the visual, through the pictures. And these make wonderful children's books to read. And then another one that I like that almost has no text is a brand new one, and this one, the French version of the Caldecott. The Caldecott medal is for the best illustrated children's book each year. We've had the Caldecott since 1939, and different countries have started their own version of that, and this won the French Caldecott. So you can see, very graphic, simple primary colors, and very, very little text, and yet a terrific moral lesson in the book. So we're back to the image being able to sustain story without the text. Our very newest kind is digital. And with digital children's texts, we lose something. What is it that you think we might lose? What do we lose by accessing the e-reader? What? Okay, certainly texture and certainly holding a book and holding your tablet are different than one another. So you do lose some sense of texture and textures in the illustrations. What's gained from digital children's books, though? Accessibility. Okay, it is accessible. What about the experience itself? More interactive. So an electronic book might have sound. It might have links that take you other places. It might have games connected to it. So we lose something, but there's also something to be gained. And as big as electronic books and Kindles have gotten, the one place where sales of traditional books are still rising is the children's book. And I think it's because that early experience of reading, that texture and holding a book are still important, and important as part of it, the tactile part of the experience. Working through your senses is still really important. Okay, what are we going to look for as our illustrators come up to talk? There are certain elements in their illustrations. So when you pick up a book or you look at the beautiful art that's up on the walls in the Chemers Gallery, what do you notice first? What are some of the elements? Color. Okay, so we definitely want to look at the color or the absence of color. What else? Composition. And can you explain that a little bit? What do you mean by composition?
The reality of all the elements on
Okay, and also looking at positive space, negative space. How much space does the illustration take up on the page? I have a graphic. Neil Gaiman's one of my favorite graphic artists, and if I can find you pages, you can see how much the illustration, the placing, the juxtaposition, how much does illustration and how much is text. And yet some other books you will look at and you will see a lot of white, empty space and very little on the page. And they convey different kinds of mood, as does color. If I give you this one and you get the primary, the bright colors, what kind of mood? Kind of upbeat, there's kind of an energy. Whereas if I use dark or cool colors, that might convey what? Sad, dark, lonely, different kinds of emotions. We want to look at color. We want to look at what else? Texture, okay. Some are layered and have texture, collage. Certainly you look for texture. How about line? Sometimes you'll read a book and it all looks very horizontal. Sometimes it'll have a lot of lines that are going this way, and sometimes you get the diagonal. Sometimes they're straight and sometimes they're curved. So we want to look at color, line, space, light and shadowing, texture we mentioned, shape, and whether it's realistic or whether it's fantastic, whether it is more like the fairy tales. There's always a relationship between the author and the artist. Sometimes it's the same person, but more and more in the industry today, one person is doing the illustrating and another person is writing the text. Sometimes that relationship is fairly distant, and sometimes there's a really close connection. Sometimes as the author is writing, they're really thinking of the visual imagery and they have something definite in mind. And sometimes it takes an artist, somebody coming in that does something completely different with the text than the author imagined originally. So as we meet 6 wonderful, well, they're going to be groups, you're going to meet more than 6 illustrators. We have elements to look for, and we also have that relationship between the image and the text to look for. So I think I will, with that, do we have our first group? Thank you.